Anita is an empathy evangelist and author of Purposeful Empathy, a podcaster. She's been doing a lot of podcasts recently. Very impressed with how many she does, I think one a week. And is also a keynote speaker. So Anita, do you want to take it away?
Thank you so much, Edwin. And it's so great to see so many familiar faces and names on this call. And I think what you're doing is amazing. And I think we're going to have a huge party when we finally all meet in California. So I teach at McGill University, and that's where I actually did my PhD. I was really interested in developing curriculum for the next generation of leaders to become sort of change makers in the world. So for my doctoral degree, I interviewed social entrepreneurs. And those are the people that are already professional change makers. I wanted to understand if they had anything in common and what they had in common, and if that could inform my curriculum and my pedagogy. And they were working on all sorts of different projects at different levels of scale, and they did have something in common without any exception. After dozens and dozens of interviews, I realized that they were activated by empathy. They saw people who were hurting, suffering, marginalized, disenfranchised in some way, and they felt the need to act on empathy. So I have been passionate about the power of empathy ever since. Now I look at it from a personal lens, an organizational lens, and of course, a social change lens. And one of the things that I learned while studying empathy is that we have the capacity to become more empathic through practice, thanks to our neuroplasticity. So when I came across that literature, I started doing all sorts of experiments, and want to start with just a quick story that I think we can all relate to. And this happened to me maybe a dozen or so years ago. I was in a long lineup at a FedEx store, waiting to send a package at the holiday season before we had phones attached to us to distract us. And it took about 30 minutes to get to the counter. And when I finally did, the woman that, who greeted me actually was really, really rude. And I really got triggered and wanted to call her out on it. But then I realized I had a moment to practice empathy. So I looked at her for a minute and I said, "Are you okay?" And she took a minute to discern if I was being sarcastic, and I wasn't. And she burst into tears and she said, "My son's at home sick. I think I'm getting a fever. I've been working double shifts for 2 weeks straight. It's 3 p.m. I haven't had a lunch break. I'm just exhausted." And I reached out for her hands, and we held hands across the counter. I hated her 20 seconds earlier, and now we were holding what we call an empathic embrace. And I realized that empathy really is our superpower. So what the work that I do training in 4 areas, is in the personal realm, at the organizational level with leaders and within cultures, and then at the social change level. Now, going back to that story of me in that empathic embrace with the woman, if somebody had been able to sort of see what my brain was up to, we'd realize that the pleasure and the reward centers would have been lit up because we were in this empathic embrace. So just like when we're eating delicious chocolate cake, if you like chocolate cake, or if we're even high on psychedelics, it's the pleasure and reward centers that light up when we are feeling connected emotionally. What also happens to our body is that when we're feeling this connection, all the bad hormones like the stress hormones that cause inflammation and chronic illness go down, and the good hormones of serotonin and oxytocin go up, and allows our bodies to function better, even improve our immune system. The only problem is, so empathy is really good for us, except when there's too much empathy, right? So we have all experienced at different times sort of our limits, right? Where we achieve sort of a period of empathic overload or compassion fatigue, and that's happening more and more in our lives and in our workplaces. So the first training program I offer is how to practice self-empathy to become healthier, happier, and more productive. And this is really important given the stress and the burnout and the collective trauma that we've all experienced of the last few years that doesn't seem to be sort of shaking off with the constant change. And this matters, of course, in terms of how we are in our home lives and in our relationships. Now, moving to the organizational work that I do, some 7 years ago, almost 7 years ago, I started posting a daily empathy post, and I've not missed a single day. It's over, I don't know, 2,500 days. Something interesting happened a couple of years ago where everyone started to pay attention to empathy in the workplace and empathic leadership. No kidding. Why? Because we heard about the Great Resignation. And then, of course, that was followed by just people who didn't leave, but weren't actually really present in the workplace or doing the quiet quitting, right? So all these meta trends started to happen that, the undercurrent is the need for more empathy in the workplace. New technology that's coming in that's kind of really questioning what it means to be human and how we're going to interface with machines. Of course, psychological safety has become a big thing in the workplace, as it should be. Nobody wants to feel shame and people want to feel authentic. Of course, the DEI plus B, belonging, has become more and more and more important, as it should be. Again, Gen Z entering the workforce with a different set of values. It's the first time in human history we have 5 generations in the same workplace. So all of this requires that we pay more attention to empathy. And what's interesting is that actually now that we've kind of gone through this post-COVID world of like, well, why does empathy matter and what difference does it make, is that there's proof now, there's evidence that shows that empathy in the workplace drives all sorts of KPIs. Now, there's a delta still that I work with, right? So most CEOs understand that it improves business outcomes, but 7 out of 10 say, oh, if I showed it at work, I'd be less respected. That's got to change. Even across the board, 2/3 of employees say, I get it. It's important for business success, organizational success, but only 1 out of 5 say it's rewarded in the workplace. That's the delta that I try to work on. So the training that I offer is how to become a more empathic leader. And I'll talk later about how to become a more empathic organization. So when it comes to leaders, if we are feeling stressed out and anxious ourselves, our brains can't be in a state of empathy at the same time. We can't do both simultaneously. So the training that I offer is a 6-step process to actually become empathic despite whatever's going on around you, so that you can actually really be supportive to your team and also practice self-empathy at the same time. In terms of the third training that I offer, how to co-create an empathic organizational culture is so important. And we want people to feel good about coming to the workplace. We want people to feel like their contributions matter and that the relationships that we have at work are also satisfying and productive and generative and collaborative. So the design thinking process that I use actually asks 3 questions where people come together and look at how we can practice self-empathy in the workplace, how we can practice empathy for others, and how the workplace itself and the organization itself can be more empathic. And through this design process, which could be like half a day or longer, you can start developing a set of priorities on what the organization wants to work on to actually imbue the organization with more empathy for a happier and more productive workforce. So the 4th training program that I offer is how to elevate our empathic consciousness to change the world. So this is circling back to the origin story of my PhD. We all know about the UN SDGs. They are extremely important. Let's just quickly rush through the slides where we're sending, spaceships to Mars. At the same time, 1 billion people don't have access to safe drinking water. We've got more modern day slaves than ever. It used to be 27 million pre-COVID. Now it's 54 million. People who live in fabulous lifestyle, and then millions who do not. And look what we're doing to the world. We're doing something so strange to our living environment. To do more of this does not make sense. And what the implications are, as we all know, sadly, is that the people who have contributed least to the problem are paying the price. Now, even at an aggregate level, we're staring climate change in the face. We're also realizing that our mental health across the board, anywhere on the planet, at all levels of age, especially young people, our mental health is under siege. So we've got to create some change. So how do we do that? More recently, in addition to the SDGs, is a set of goals called the inner development goals. What change, calling on Gandhi, be the change that you want to see in the world. How can we create the inner change that we need to create the outer change? So in the 3rd column, you'll see that empathy and compassion is part of the work that we need to do. Now, you'll recall Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Achieving our full potential was everything that humans wanted to achieve. Well, just before he died, he said, no, it's about self-transcendence, achieving a sense of purpose beyond the self. So the 4th bit of work that I do is unpacking a framework of purposeful empathy. That outer rim is really important. The honoring of our interdependence and oneness, the spiritual work of empathy, and then the political work of empathy, which is the bottom rim, striving for peace, justice, equity, and sustainability, challenging the status quo. So you can read about this in the book that I wrote. You can also link in with me. And of course, as Edwin graciously mentioned, I've got over, I guess, about 150 interviews with people who I believe are also part of the empathy revolution. Thank you so much, Edwin, for bringing us all together and for letting me share what I'm up to.